So welcome everybody to the Metrics International Forum. The forum is organized by the Meta Research Innovation Center at Stanford, or short Metrics. The center is directed by John Ioannidis and Steve Goodman, and we are a research group and fellowship program dedicated to finding ways to improve the validity and transparency of scientific research. I'm Mick Siebert, a postdoc at Metrics, and I will be today's moderator. All of our international forums are recorded and can be accessed on our website. Please keep your questions until the end or write them in a chat during the presentation. Our presenter today is Antica Čulina. Antica is a senior scientist at the Ruda Bošković Institute in Croatia. She is an evolutionary ecologist, and over the last 8 years, she increasingly works on open science and meta-science topics. She is a co-founder and executive board member of SORTEE and SPI-Birds, the advisory committee member of Open Science Netherlands, FAIRsFAIR, and Open Knowledge Maps. So if you're ready, Antica, we can start.
Yes, thank you, Max. And thanks everyone for joining today. Because I'm going to present something that's just kind of like one step in the bigger project that we are currently kind of conducting. And I think it's very important that we get as much as feedback as possible. Probably I had too many S's here. With that in mind, I'll just start. So we got interested in registration quite recently, I would say, and how it can improve quality of research. But because there is no evidence from ecology of whether it improves or does not improve quality of research, we actually conducted a more exploratory survey from other fields. And why did we start to think about pre-registration or registration? Is because we started to work on research waste, and maybe you've heard the term because it was estimated in 2009 for medicine to be 85% of research. What is research waste? So this is all research that has limited or no value to an end user, and even worse, it can be misinformative. For example, if a project is conducted, but no result is published and no data set is published, that's completely wasted because nobody would, well, larger scale audience would not benefit from it. So we were interested in how we do in ecology, and we estimated it to be very close to what was estimated in medicine, between 82 and 89%, which is really like high. And I actually presented this work, I think 2 years ago at the same forum. And how we did this estimate, so we gathered already published meta-studies that estimated certain components of research waste. Altogether, we had, I think, 34 such meta-studies, and they kind of evaluated altogether more than 10,000 studies in ecology. So in simple terms, almost half of ecological research never gets published. Obviously, this is going to be low quality work that does not pass a review, but also work that did not find interesting result and thus is unpublished because of publication bias and lack of time. You know, you do your PhD and you go to the next project and some chapters are never published. Then shockingly, 70% of published work is poorly planned. For example, they do not use control group if they should actually, while they should have used it, or they use incorrect control group or incorrect analysis, or they don't blind themselves to data analysis or data collection. And out of published studies, so in journals, almost 40% is underreported. Results are underreported. So for example, they don't give you a sample size, or they don't even give you effect size, or they don't provide measure of uncertainty. So then in the best case scenario, if we assume that all of the well-planned research is also well reported, and we could not study this because these were separate sets of studies, but let's assume it, then we have 82% of wasted research. And if all well-planned studies are also badly reported, then we have 89% of research waste. And I really feel this is huge because especially if you think that ecology is a field that has really high relevance to fighting many global challenges, such as climate change or biodiversity loss. And on the top of this, our definition of research waste is kind of limited to what I call classical research cycle. And it's based on what they've done previously in medicine, so we kind of followed similar approach, but it can be much larger. If you think of all the unpublished data sets, unpublished analysis codes, unpublished methods, and finally, not all publications are actually accessible to everyone. So this notion of wasted research or unused research is much larger. And I find it very interesting that these two estimates are so close to each other, and I would really love to see estimates from other fields, and I believe they would be very similar. And why I think this is so is because science is always done by humans, maybe sometimes by machines these days. And we are all embedded in the same overall system of publishing and financing. So we have a researcher on one side who would actually should do a preferred research, which is slower, takes more time, is pre-registered, so it's more robust. But what we have on the other side is incentives that push researchers to do quick science and publish as much as possible. And we started to think about how can we reduce this huge amount of research that is uninformative. And we believe that many of the open science practices can help us. But in ecology, for example, open data are quite common now. More than 90% of publications would have open data. Open code is also getting more traction. But something that's really never ever mentioned almost is registration. So there was one study, and I'm sorry I did not add the reference. They looked at systematic reviews in ecology and meta-analysis, and only 3% were pre-registered. And I believe for primary research, it would be even lower percentage. And also we checked for registered reports and found 24 journals that offer this type of publication. And this is out of roughly around 300 journals that publish ecological and evolutionary research. And then we checked actually how many registered reports have been published, and it's only 20 between 2016, when the first one was published, and 2023 when we checked. So obviously it's very uncommon. And when I talk about registration, and I think this is very important for people who come from medicine, I consider both pre-registration and registered reports. And in medicine, usually registration is just it's pre-registration. And I actually prefer that term because I don't know how you can pre-register, but pre-registration is commonly used in, for example, psychology or in ecology. Anyway, let's not go into discussion on terminologies. So I think everybody here knows how we do science. We develop ID, we design a study, collect data, write report, submit it, and then it hopefully gets published. And if we do registration, then at this point, when we have our design, then we submit this design to a registry. And in medicine, this is often a data collection plan. So researchers specify, for example, sample size, blinding procedures, and similar. In psychology, it's also much about registering your analysis because that prevents questionable research practices. And then ideally also when you analyze your data, even if you maybe don't write official report or manuscript, you can just publish your results. And in medicine, this is often required by funders and journals and some international standards for clinical trials. So a study does not have to be published, but results have to be reported. In registered reports, again, I think most of the audience here would know, at the point of finishing your design, you actually submit this protocol to a journal, and this protocol goes into a review, and this feedbacks on your study design because reviewers might have some suggestions on how to improve your design. And once that's finished, then you publish your protocol and continue with the rest of the study, which you submit as a regular manuscript, and it goes stage 2 peer review. And the nice thing with registered reports is that the study is published or should be published no matter what you find. So it's research that has some impact or is interesting. It has robust design, and thus it doesn't matter what you found. Is it a significant or not significant result? Is it interesting or not interesting result? A research gets published. And we really think that research-based, or maybe we can also say it as research quality, can be reduced by registration. And we found 5 main components of how this can actually happen. So registration practices, again, it's not just pre-registration, it's registration, pre-registration and registered reports. They can improve study planning and also prevent duplication. They reduce QRPs. They can reduce publication bias and increase the availability of results. They could improve reporting in published studies. And finally, they could also increase availability of data and software. Okay, so maybe some of these things are not straightforward to think like how can they do all these things. So in the rest of the talk, I will provide some support and some reasoning for why we think these could actually really be the outcome of registration. Also support or evidence from medicine and psychology. And also some changes we believe the registration system should offer in order to really realize these potential benefits. And this is something that I would really like also to get the feedback on, because obviously we need some evidence. So what we did, we conducted an exploratory survey. We looked for meta-studies published in any field that quantified the impact of registration practices on methodological quality, completeness of reporting and studies, and features of obtained results. By that, I mean, for example, statistical significance, the magnitude of the effect size, whether results support or don't support the main hypothesis, and similar. And I want to also highlight here that this was exploratory survey, so it was not proper systematic survey. We only looked into one database, Web of Science, and we also did not conduct any appraisal of the studies. So we see this as a starting point for somebody else, because we are quite underpowered with the amount of people. If somebody of you wants to do a more proper survey, our data set will soon be published with our publication. It's accepted, but we're waiting for publication. So, it would be great if somebody takes on this and actually does it a bit more systematically. So we detected 26 meta-studies, 19 from medicine, 6 from psychology, and 1 covering both fields. And 21 was on pre-registration, and 5 on registered reports. And I want to mention that most pre-registration studies were from medicine, and most on registered reports were from psychology. Okay, so improving study planning and preventing duplication. This happens in 2 ways. One is because work can be quality checked. This happens in a stage 1 peer review of registered reports, but it could also happen for pre-registrations. And we think this could be quite cool if pre-registrations would be actually checked by somebody. And actually, I came to this idea by talking to somebody at the wedding, and this person worked at a medical institute in the US, and they had a team of 20 people who were actually doing exactly this. They were checking all planned studies from that institute, providing feedback on statistics, on data collection, and then the study would actually start. So I think this could be done on a larger scale, or within institutes, or within a country, or maybe some international kind of institution that would provide this kind of service. And it can happen via other routes, and I'll talk about them a bit later. So this is a nice study from Soderberg et al. 2021 in psychology. They actually looked at several aspects of methodological quality in registered reports versus standard literature. And if this effect size is on the right, that means that there is quite strong evidence that registered reports have much better, for example, at the top methodological rigor or quality of methods. So I can't tell you exactly how they studied this. We did not go into details of what these actually mean, but you can see that registered reports do much better than standard literature. But this is, as I said, not commonly done for pre-registrations. And we could only find, and I would really like to hear from others if you know some examples of registries that provide feedback on the pre-registrations. And we found Australian, New Zealand Clinical Trials Registry, so they do that. But even without external peer review, it seems that pre-registrations can still improve study design. And from our survey, these meta-studies detected that pre-registered trials had better methodological quality. This was detected in one meta-study. They had lower risk of bias, detected by 6 meta-studies, and they also had larger sample sizes, 9 meta-studies. So why is this so? We can only, try to guess. One reason could be that pre-registrations require you to define certain aspects of your methodology, for example, blinding procedures that you might not otherwise think about. So this could be one potential way. Then how can registration reduce questionable research practices? Example again from psychology, where this was actually, I think, the reason why they started with pre-registration and registered reports, is that you fix your analysis ahead, and thus you're less likely to commit, for example, p-hacking or similar. And this is an example from Scheel and others, who showed that and sorry, I have to say here that we cannot study directly questionable research practices because you don't know what they actually did in their analysis if it's not reported. But we know that under lower questionable research practices, we expect less significant results, lower effect sizes, results that less often support the hypothesis in question. And this is what studies actually do find. So this is for registered reports. Those that are registered reports, they find support for hypothesis in roughly 40% of cases, while non-standard, standard literature almost always finds support for the main hypothesis. In our survey, we detected meta-studies also that showed something similar. So pre-registered studies had smaller effect sizes, which was found in 5 of 5 meta-studies. They less often support hypotheses, found in 4 of 5 meta-studies, and had lower statistical significance. Again, found in just one. There was only one meta-study on this topic. And there were also 4 meta-studies on registered reports, and they found equivalent results. So I guess there is quite strong support that they do reduce questionable research practices. Then, whether they reduce publication bias and whether they increase the availability of results, again, this is something that's relatively difficult to study. There was one study that did show that primary outcomes that have been predefined in pre-registrations have been reported in registry, so 72% of these results have actually been reported. But if you look at the published literature from these same pre-registrations, they only report only 22% of results. So for example, this is a nice case that showed that actually you have more results in registries than in published literature that comes from these same studies. And we detected 9 meta-studies that found also that there's quite a lot of discrepancy between outcomes and results reported in published studies and their entry in the registry. And when it was possible to assess, these discrepancies, as expected, were in favor of statistically significant results. And this was found in 8 of 9 meta-studies. So this means that maybe we could trust results in registries more, and that we also have a larger pool of results in registries than in published literature. And this is especially important for evidence synthesis and similar. Then whether registration and registered reports improve reporting, we did not find evidence for this. But we believe that if you have templates and guidelines, no evidence means that we just did not detect any study, a meta-study that looked into this topic. Because we believe that if you have some templates and guidelines that tell you what you need to report, for example, sample size, and we see in ecology, probably 20% of papers do not report sample size, then I guess you're more likely to also report that in your publication. We did find 4 meta-studies that looked into methodological reporting, so how complete the methodological reporting was, and it was much better in pre-registered articles that were later published than in published articles that were not pre-registered. Of course, this is not same as reporting of results, but it's maybe an indication of that it does have some impact. And finally, this bit with increased data and software availability, because we suggest, again, this may not be something that's viable, but that registrations could also involve data management and software management plans. And we know that software management and data management plans do improve the quality of the data and software that comes out of the project, and that they also increase the availability of data and software. And we think, and well, actually, I think it's quite clear that if you, for example, had data underlying a study, even if this study does not report a sample size, you can just go to a data set and see the sample size. Or if something else is not provided, or if just a p-value is provided, you can just go back, take the data, take the code, and recreate the same result. Again, this is just the ideal world. We know that when you try to reproduce scientific results, even if you have data and software, you can still rarely produce them. But these are just some of kind of ideal scenario that we would try to strive to, but we also understand probably it's not fully achievable. So based on these results, we really believe that pre-registration and registered reports should be favored in ecology, but there are several aspects that need to be considered here, and that's infrastructure, tools, support for researchers, and of course this reward and incentive and how do you call them, policy system. And finally, we really believe it's extremely important to also evaluate, do these things actually really make a difference? Does introducing a policy increases number of pre-registrations? Does it increase the quality of pre-registrations and similar? And for infrastructures, we provide a few discussion points. So this is not that we say it should be like this, because we first need to actually have some discussion within ecological communities. So one idea is whether to have ecology-specific registry, or should it be embedded in existing options such as Open Science Framework. Having ecology-specific registry, I personally favor that one, because then you have one place where you can actually really search for ecological studies. And I think that the same with data, if you have a discipline-specific repository, that's always favored compared to a general repository. I would think that's the same for registries. Something that current registries do not often offer, and that's searchability. So when you go into registry, that you can easily, using some keywords, that you can find studies that you're interested in. But not only that, it would be ideal that these, let's call them metadata about studies, are exposed to other sources. Imagine that you can use Web of Science to find all the published literature, but also all the studies that are in registries, and that hopefully also have their results reported there. It would drastically increase your sample size, for example, for evidence synthesis. So we would like to see that if there is an ecology-specific registry created, that it has this feature. In ecology, registered reports are only offered so far for experimental studies. So we would like to see also a consideration of observational studies, because many studies in ecology are observational. Then what we also don't have is some registration or basic registration requirements and templates, as well as maybe consider developing software and data management plans. Then researchers obviously have to be supported, and we need teams of experts to support us. We need also more education on how to pre-register, but also what I already mentioned, these teams that would check quality of registration, because if you have pre-registration and nobody checks it and it still has a lot of flaws, it has much less likelihood that it's going to improve the quality of the final product than if it was actually peer-reviewed in some form. It does not have to be official peer review. And finally, all of these things that I don't know much about, and that's this reward and requirement system. So this is not my field of expertise, but obviously that's extremely important to also consider. And finally, and this figure I have to put everywhere because they did not like it and we had to exclude it from our manuscript. So now it's going to be in every presentation about this project, because this all goes actually under umbrella of funders, publishers, research institutions who have to provide money to do all of that, who need to help with organizing forums together with, for example, discipline-specific societies, such as Society for Open, Reliable, and Transparent Ecology and Evolutions. Journals should really encourage editorials on this topic, because ecologists, really, if I talk to ecologists, I can tell you with 99% confidence that they never heard about pre-registration or even registered reports. So we need to somehow showcase that these do exist. And it would be really nice to have some journal series also in ecology that would showcase meta-studies on pre-registration, surveys on why people don't really register, and similar. So we are very at the starting point in ecology, but luckily we can learn from other fields such as medicine and psychology to maybe make it a bit less difficult for ecology to transition to more pre-registration. And this is just a part of our larger project on empowering ecological research via open science, where we want to actually look into different aspects of open science and how they do or don't improve the quality of ecological research and the impact of ecological research. And within this project, we are working on something we call taxonomy of research waste, because currently we have these two studies. Maybe there are more. I never conducted a systematic review or even Googled really. I did, but it did not appear in the first 3 pages, so then I gave up. Because, for example, in medicine, one component of research waste was relevance to the patients. This is not something that we actually looked in ecology because it's kind of different type of science. Maybe for more specific subdisciplines such as conservation biology, relevance would be applicable. But yeah, what we want to do is to develop a framework that would be more applicable to different types of research fields. And the second is that we also want to develop a framework for reduction of research waste, or in a more positive terms, increasing quality and impact of research, where we want to find all the possible actions that can improve research quality, for example, pre-registration, open data, software, open data policies, and similar. Then define the actors who are responsible for implementing these actions. And finally, we want also evidence whether these actions work or they do not work. So if somebody wants to, for example, introduce a certain policy, they can also go to our framework and see whether there are some studies that support this notion, what were problems with implementing policies. For example, policies are often not followed if you don't check if they are followed, and similar. And this is really now starting, and we would like to invite anyone who would like to participate to get in touch. On the last slide, there is my email, because the idea is that we create some kind of very basic framework and then we populate it with new items, and this should be community effort. And with that, I'm going to conclude my talk, and I say hvala. This is thank you in Croatian. And the research that I've presented would not be possible without my PhD student Marija Purgar and collaborators Tim Klanšek, Paul Glasiu, and Professor Shinichi Nakagawa. And of course, many more people are involved in the current project. So I hope that maybe some of you would also get involved in some aspect. And there is my email, so please get in touch if you would like to receive some updates and also participate in meetings and similar. And that's all from me. Half an hour.